actual chamber can be quite bad acoustically, so I'll assist everyone. And again, a reminder, please only use the seats where there's a green tick. If you are moving around, please ensure you use masks as well, and there's extra sanitisation equipment available. Otherwise, again, Happy New Year to everyone, and welcome to this evening's meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillor Leila Bennett. Are there any other apologies to report? No? Okay. Can I advise members of the sad death of former Liverpool councillor and Lord Mayor of the city, Alderman Roger Johnson? Roger's funeral will take place at 10 AM at St Barnabas Church on Penny Lane on Tuesday, the 25th of January. Can we please observe a minute's silence? Okay, thank you, members. Okay, item 2, declaration of interests. Can I remind members and officers that you're only required to declare at meetings any disclosable, pecuniary or prejudicial interest, in which case the independent members or officers will need to leave the hall during the consideration of the item. Do anybody have any interest to declare at this meeting? No? Okay. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting of 2nd November 2021. Are there any issues relating to the minutes? Okay, can I move that the minutes are approved? Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 4 is Chair's update. I've included a few things for you in your packs that are on your seats or been given to you by committee services. Just a few things from previous meetings. The Bristol external PSIS review. We haven't got an update for that as of yet, but a series of interviews and evaluations have taken place. We hope to have an update for that at the next meeting. The risk management strategy. Last meeting we did approve the risk management strategy and corporate risk register, and I presented that to Cabinet last month, which was agreed. As I said before, what we want to do as part of this is do a wider transparency document, so that this isn't something that is just lip service and something that we need to do based on the Commissioner's recommendation, but something that we really want to embed as part of the Council's culture and culture change. So what we will do in between this meeting and perhaps the next meeting is send members a draft of what this new transparency page hub will be available for members for, and we'll seek your comments on that. And as part of that, that will be things like the Constitution, the risk management strategy, who's who within that, so that there's a clear link for people to know where to go to. Okay. Companies Governance Subcommittee, on your seats or in your packs, you will see a draft terms of reference for a companies governance subgroup. We did agree at this committee to set up a subgroup that would solely look at the governance structures of our companies. The idea is that this would possibly meet around 4 times over the next year and take up to 5 members either of this committee or wider members as well. And I know that Stephen and Ramon, unless you say any different, have agreed to come on to that committee, but I invite members here and we'll do a bit of comms as well to see if any other members want to be part of that. But if you do, then do let me know. the suggested meeting is likely to take place in the first week of February. So I'm keen to have a wide range of members, particularly from different political parties. So obviously let me know that you, if you want to be part of that. Additional meetings, members will note that training on Treasury management has been scheduled for the 18th of January, and you would have received that from Democratic Services. If you could let Vicky know, then that would be great if you can attend that. In addition, we'll be adding a few more meetings to the calendar going forward, including an audit committee for the 24th of February to specifically look at the budget. So a couple of dates for your diary there to just put in, but notifications will be sent out to members in advance of those. I don't have anything else in relation to updates, but has anyone got any questions, comments? Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of the governance, company governance review, has there been discussion about the interaction with Cabinet? Because clearly the Council's objectives for the organisation's concerned, probably against which presumably we will be auditing their performance and their governance and arrangements. Those objectives should probably be set by Cabinet. And I don't know whether or not Cabinet whether their guidance as to the yardstick by which we should be carrying out our function is going to take place sequentially before the first meeting that you've just described. And if
Chris,
maybe we could just make a gentle suggestion.
There's a couple of pieces of work going on with company governance. One is in relation to the strategic improvement plan that the council agreed, and the improvement plan agreed with commissioners. So there's work being led by one of the cabinet members, I think it's Harry Doyle, which will be coming forward from work with local partnerships about the review of the arrangements. This specific subgroup will only deal with the governance arrangements that's related to audit committee, so it'll be quite specific. It's not about the future relationship or other issues. So, for example, there's been work done on the articles, standard articles, shareholder representation and reserve matters. So that'll come through both the Cabinet and that subgroup.
But will it not have to be the decision of Cabinet, for example, what matters they want to reserve to Council, what ones they want to have joint decision making on, and what ones they want to fully delegate? And then, you know, because that's a Council objective, and whereas we will be wanting then to see whether or not performance is in accordance with that, and whether the governance arrangements actually deliver that outcome that the Council strategically set.
The subgroup is just a starting point on the journey for any review of the company governance arrangements.
I do get that, absolutely. My point was really that we probably need to run in parallel, don't we? And probably Cabinet needs to make the first move on this so that we can see whether or not the arrangements meet the objectives that are set by Cabinet.
If I can say there's going to be a lot of paperwork in the next 2-3 months on the company governance, which will go to various meetings. The subgroup will be a starting point, the Cabinet, but also the improvement, the SIP, the improvement programme as an action plan. There's been a lot of work undertaken by local partnerships, reviewing the arrangements. So members of this committee will see it because it will come through and from the subgroup into the Cabinet.
I have an indication from Daniel Fenwick on the Teams.
Hello, and thank you, Chair, and hello, committee. In response to the question, I think I agree with Councillor Brandt in respect of the Cabinet decision as to what you might call the terms of reference and reserve matters against which this committee would be judging the governance of the individual companies, and I think that is built into the work that Chris is outlining, if that's of assistance. So I think I do agree with the point you're making, and I think Chris has built that in already.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments in relation to this item? Okay, move on. Okay, item 5 is Grant Thornton progress report, which is on pages 18 to 43 of your agenda pack. It's obviously the update from our external auditor, and it's attached to your agenda pack our RD questions that were posed by Grant Thornton to Liverpool City Council that were announced at the last meeting in relation to the 2019-2020 account sign-off. Can I ask, before I take Andy Smith, can I ask Chris Walsh to give an update in terms of the information that's been provided to Grant Thornton, and then I will ask Andy to come in.
Chair, I think you've just indicated the questions were presented to the last meeting. Officers have done a response on that. The response to the questions indicate the structures in place, procedures in place. There's reference to the statutory officers group, the due diligence group that was put in place during the period. Also, the role of this committee in signing off both the audit plan, the counter fraud plan, and the new initiatives that's been brought in over the last 2 years. Fraud risk registers for directorates, the quarterly governance reports which you're getting from each directorate to each meeting, and also the training that's taken place both for officers and members, which has been mandatory training from May. There's quite a lot of information in there in terms of responses, so I'm happy to take any questions about those responses.
Okay, does anyone want to ask Chris any questions before I bring in Andy as part of those responses? Okay, Andy, do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I suppose just to remind committee as to why we raise these additional inquiries to begin with. Obviously, we've been conducting the 1920 and 2021 audits for some time now. We after reviewing the best value inspection report and speaking to the likes of the police, seeking our own legal advice and taking advice from colleagues within our forensic functions and audit regulation functions, we decided that we didn't have enough evidence at that point in time to proceed with signing off the 1920 accounts. And that was why we raised these additional inquiries, and we sent those inquiries to management on the 2nd of September. We received the written response from the council on the 2nd of December, and since that time we've obviously been reviewing that response in detail. I have shared that response again with colleagues in our forensic function and our audit regulation function who provide expertise around the requirements of, that we need to fulfil in terms of auditing standards. And I think it was the 21st of September we attended the statutory officer group meeting to provide our feedback on that response. Unfortunately, our view is that the evidence that management is presenting to us is insufficient, in the sense of what we were looking for is evidence that the alleged bribery and corruption issues do not go wider than what is currently known. And at the moment, we believe that the best value inspection report only really looked at in detail areas around regeneration, highways planning, and the property asset management service. We know that the review did go a little bit wider, but what it didn't do was sort of proactively go out to confirm that there weren't any other issues out in other parts of the council, and that is where we believe that there is still a deficiency in the evidence. So what we did say to management on the 21st of December was that we do need more evidence, and it's likely in our view that an independent inquiry is probably needed. We think that review should be taken by someone that's independent and has expertise in forensic investigations. And in terms of next steps, we've agreed with management to have a further meeting, hopefully sometime shortly in the next few weeks, to further define the scope of that work and to have that discussion alongside the commissioners as well. So that's where we currently are. Unfortunately, that does mean that we're still in a position where we can't give any real clear indication as to when we can sign off the 1920 or 2021 audit at this point in time. I'm more than happy to take questions, Chair, on that.
I'm going to bring in Tony Reeves as Chief Executive first.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to go into too much detail at this stage. We don't automatically accept what Grant Thornton are asking. We are in discussions with them, as Andy said. We're also talking to commissioners, about the requirement. We're a bit concerned about how you prove a negative and the cost of doing so. But we are in discussions, and those are positive discussions, and we'll keep this committee informed as those that discussion crystallises and we reach a point of consensus on this issue.
Ramon?
Hi. So thanks for the update on that, Andy. I think one of the things that is just pointed out as a theory when discussing this between myself and Stephen is that there seems to be a general consensus that you're not really too happy with the responses that received back, which what you've just mentioned previously, and that you've asked for an independent review to be held. Do you have any particular parameters that you want answering within that independent inquiry, opposed to the City Council, if they do choose to go down the path of getting that done, that they don't get it done in the wrong way, and then we go back through the hamster wheel again? So is there some particular parameters that you would like answering, or like a framework of a response that you would like?
Yes. So as I said, we do need to sit down with management and commissioners to define the scope of that work, and it is really important that the scope of that work could meet the evidential needs that we're looking for. So the scoping of this piece of work will be really important. At a high level, we think the scope of this review needs to look in depth at the wider council departments that weren't subject to the best value inspection. So predominantly those service areas that sit outside regeneration, highways planning and property asset management. There may be some lighter touch work that happens still in those areas, but the main scope of this work would be to look at the other aspects of the council. We would agree a materiality threshold that we're comfortable with management for the review of that work. So we're not going to necessarily look at every single, for example, delegated action decision that was made. We would look at ones that are material in nature. In terms of what we would expect the inquiry to involve, we would probably expect that it would include the obtaining of for structured review of communications data, primarily emails, but potentially also text messages of senior officers. That would probably be heads of department and above, and anyone else involved in delegated authority decisions. As I said, we would expect there to be a review of all delegated authority decisions in those service areas. Again, as I said, we'll probably set a materiality level around that. Obviously, there would then be interviews with key personnel. We'd probably look at some of the procurement processes that have been conducted as well, for major contracts as well. So it will involve those kind of things. But as I said, we need to be clear on the scope from the beginning, and we need to discuss that with management and commissioners. It is really important that the scope is right. If we think that scope is going to be too limited, and it won't therefore be able to give us what we need in terms of audit evidence to sign off the audit, we will be clear about that from the off. We don't see that any point in a review taking place that we don't think is going to be sufficient in scope to begin with. So we will make sure that we spend a lot of time getting the scope right, and that it can succeed in giving us the evidence that we need.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Slightly endorse what the Chief Executive said. Proving a negative is very difficult. There's only one way you can do it in a big organisation, and that's to go through every single transaction that's happened. And we are a big organisation, and there will been hundreds of thousands of transactions that have taken place over the year that you're talking about. Traditionally, tell me, there's a combination of guidance that gets applied when the audit function is being carried out, and that's normally a risk-based assessment. When you are looking at activities that are particularly high risk, you then obviously consult with members of staff to see whether or not issues have been raised. You talk with internal audit about their own sense checking that they periodically carry out, and you obviously take a wider remit of anything that's been brought to your attention by whistleblowers or anything else. The high risk factors of the council activity that have been subject to a lot of scrutiny, rightly, have been looked into by the external report commissioned by the Secretary of State, but have also been considerably, without having there were warning systems in the council that should and could have, if they'd been properly scrutinised, have resulted in auditors directing their attention to those those areas of council activity over time in any event. Are you saying to us, as the audit committee, that there is a particular reason for you to be concerned about the other areas of activity which have been brought to your attention, i.e. audit reports that give rise to concern, whistleblowers or similar, which would be one area of which would be a risk-based approach? Or are you saying to us as an audit committee, well, problems have been found in one area, so who knows what else could be there, and we want every stone uncovered, which is a little, well, if I put it somewhat pejoratively, could be seen as a bit of a defensive stance to take from the auditors by saying, well, who knows what could be out there, and isn't the normal approach taken towards an audit function. And frankly, the only way you can prove a negative, as I said, is to go through every single bottle of milk that's been purchased by every single petty cash box in every single floor in the council departments, etc., etc. Which of those two are you telling us? And if it is in fact that you have particular reason to have concerns about particular areas of council activity, I guess my next question will be, well, why aren't they being looked into already?
It is more of the latter, in the sense of obviously once the mayor got arrested, that significantly changed the requirements of what we need to do from an audit point of view. So yes, it is more of the fact that specific allegations of bribery and corruption were identified in regeneration, highways planning and asset management, and we now need to, as you described, prove a negative in other aspects of the council. We do appreciate the point around proportionality, and that there is no way we're going to be able to look at every single transaction that's occurred in those areas. But that is why we will define a materiality level for the scope of this review that we believe is proportionate, but ultimately gives us assurance that we can materially say there's no fraud or error in the accounts. So we're looking to prove that there isn't material issues that we need to be concerned about here, rather than to prove the complete absence of bribery and corruption, albeit at a trivial level.
Do you want to come back and follow up?
Yeah, I mean, you specifically refer to bribery and corruption there. Is that the area that you're of concern that you have? So it's not the normal accounting errors that sometimes arise where people have, misfiled stuff or whatever it might be. You're specifically directing yourself and directing us as an audit committee and the council as a whole to carry out an inquiry to see whether there's bribery and corruption elsewhere, but with an absence of any evidence pointing to such having taken place by any because in the audit report, in the management letter that you referred to, you specifically refer to the council staff being invited to come forward under a new regime, and a no blame culture, saying, please tell us if anything else has gone on that any bit of the council is worried about, and nobody has come forward. Presumably there are no audit reports that indicate fraud or bribery and corruption elsewhere. Well, to be very, a set of auditors got hammered by the Financial Reporting Council for wrongly signing off a local authority's accounts, not ours, I don't think, and I think they got fined quite a considerable amount of money. What assurance can you give the committee that the defensive approach that's being suggested is in the council's interest rather than the auditors?
The approach that we're taking is simply to meet the auditing requirements, the auditing standards that we need to comply with. Obviously, so from it's not a defensive approach. It's about fulfilling our responsibilities under that requirement. So we absolutely feel that this is necessary to do our job properly. You referred in terms of the evidence of lack of whistleblowing and no audit reports indicating issues elsewhere in the council, but our view is that that isn't sufficient evidence to say that the alleged bribery and corruption issues that have occurred elsewhere haven't occurred elsewhere. The reason for that is, one, whistleblowing is far from foolproof in identifying fraud, particularly because obviously people engaged in criminal behaviour are very unlikely to come forward, and it may be hard for others who are not involved to actually notice it. So it's not a reliable source of evidence, certainly not sufficient for us to rely upon. And internal audits work isn't necessarily designed, or its primary purpose is not to detect fraud in any case as well. So what we're looking for is a piece of work that is actually going out there to identify whether material fraud and alleged bribery and corruption have occurred elsewhere. Its purpose and design will be very different from the sources of assurance that you've mentioned, and will give much greater assurance to us and enable us to move on, hopefully on the basis that it doesn't identify any further issues.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crowe.
Thanks, Chair. My question is probably aimed more at Chris and Tony about the council response to this. It's just to understand a little bit more why we're resisting an independent inquiry. Because obviously the last year or so has been about kind of owning up to past mistakes, trying to sort of clear the decks and start afresh. And obviously, you know, looking at these things, sunlight being the best disinfectant and all that. What is the reason for not wanting an independent inquiry, so we can get to the bottom of any issues that might be hidden? So that's just one question. And just also, what are the sort of future implications if we can't get the account signed off by an auditor at any point?
Chris or Tony or Mel, do you want to come in at this on that particular question?
Perhaps Mel can come in on the implications of the accounts not being signed off as our Section 151 officer. The concerns we have are that we have seen no evidence whatsoever of any wrongdoing elsewhere in the council. Bear in mind, and I don't want to say too much about this, the issues that led to the best value investigation were surfaced within the council, and with really rigorous processes that we put in place to identify issues, responding to some of the complaints that we had, commissioning independent investigations. We've been very, very robust on that. The time period that's covered by these accounts, the time period after which we put those things in place, there were a significant number of whistleblowings in the Regeneration department. There is nothing that we have seen that indicates there's a problem elsewhere. And the cost of proving a negative, where, as Councillor Brandt says, and I accept Andy's making a point about proportionality, could be very, very extensive indeed. And we're questioning, it's an ongoing discussion, so we're not, you know, we haven't fallen out with our auditors, and we're also talking to the commissioners about this. We're questioning the value for money and the proportionality of, or how proportionate this is, given the lack of any evidence that we have seen to suggest there is a problem anywhere else in our organisation. And Max Caller was invited by the Secretary of State to look at other areas of the council if he believed, during the time he was on site with his team looking intensively at council activity, there was anything else to look at. And he was content to say that he didn't believe that was the case as well. And that is further evidence to us that this may not be proportionate. But as I said, Chair, that conversation with Grant Thornton and the commissioners is ongoing. And we, of course, will keep this committee apprised of those discussions as they go forward.
On the non-sign off of the accounts, if we can't come to an agreement, what will happen is Grant Thornton will issue a qualified opinion of the accounts. So in effect, they're signed, but with outstanding issues that the auditors feel we haven't addressed. The implications of not getting them signed and keep delaying the signature of them is we can't fulfil our whole of government accounts responsibility. So we're getting letters and pressure from the Department for Levelling Up around getting those accounts in so they can prepare whole of government accounts. So the first thing we're going to do is write a letter through to Catherine Francis, which sets out the position. We want to do that in conjunction with Grant Thornton. There are a number of authorities who've got delayed accounts being signed off. So at the moment, we're not stood alone. However, our issues are slightly different to some of the other authorities. So that's the first thing we'll do. If we can't get to a place where we agree and we end up with a qualified opinion, we won't do that without talking to you first about what the implications are, because they will be broader than just whole of government accounts. It may impact on Treasury management, for example, and we'll need to have a look at the extent of that. At the moment, the rates we get on Treasury management are based on sovereign ratings. So whatever the UK looks like, we get those ratings as well. If we've got a set of unqualified, when it comes to authority lending, that may be more expensive for us, but we'll set all that out for you before we get to that stage.
Okay, thank you. I've got a lot of questions on this. I don't want to take all of them. So, Stephen Gregory on Teams.
Hi guys. Firstly, very reassured by the comments of the Chief Executive in terms of the seriousness with which this is being dealt with and pursued, which I think is very appropriate given what we just heard. If I can just confirm with Grant Thornton, actually, just a couple of things. I think what you were saying was that that you were content with the procedural changes that were outlined in the response that you received to the questions that you asked. What you were not content with was the substantive nature of that response, and particularly the fact that whilst procedures may have been put in place which differ from those that pertained at the time, they did not go back over transactions, for example. So could you firstly just confirm that? And secondly, you talked about taking a risk-based approach, which is certainly to be welcomed, and mentioned materiality, which is critical. Could you confirm also that you were satisfied with a sample-based approach should any substantive work be required by yourselves, that you'd be content with not trawling through all the transactions as we previously expressed our concerns about, but an appropriate sampling approach would be sensible, on the basis, of course, that should problems be found in selected sample items, that sample sizes would be extended.
Okay, thank you. So in response to the first clarification, yes, we're not saying that we're not satisfied with the procedural changes that have been made since obviously the issues were first identified. This is more about the whether historically there are more allegations or potential issues around bribery and corruption that are beyond what we already know about and what's obviously subject to the police investigation. So it's more about the evidence base for that rather than a comment around procedural changes. In terms of the scope of the work, we may be able to do sample testing in some areas. So, for example, around key procurement decisions, we may be able to do that on a sample basis rather than looking at all procurements over a certain value. I think where it becomes more difficult is around delegated authority decisions, because that's obviously a very specific source of risk. So we would probably want to look at all delegated action authority decisions, above a certain level of materiality, which, as I say, we'll define that limit and agree that with management and commissioners in due course.
Okay, Councillor Crofts.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my question's in three parts. Forgive me. First part is, you say that it is your view that it's necessary to undertake this independent forensic inquiry for you to be able to fulfil your objectives of the audit. My question in respect to that is, why now? The former mayor was arrested 13 months ago, and this is the first time that you've chosen to make reference to this being a necessary requirement for you to be able to carry out your responsibilities. So what has been the more recent trigger to have brought you to this point? The second question is the potential for additional allegations of bribery and corruption clearly go beyond the two unsigned accounting periods that we're talking about now. What consideration have you given to the possibility of there being bribery and corruption allegations as unspecified in the years for which you have previously signed off the accounts? And then the third part is, it's a good question, I guess, because you might not know the answer to this yet, but I'd be grateful if you could give a flavour of your thinking. The materiality point is clearly very significant because it will reflect the amount of work that will need to be undertaken and therefore potentially the cost that will be incurred by the city as a result of the determination that you make on materiality. What sort of level of materiality do you think is likely to be in play if such an inquiry were to take place?
Okay, thank you. So I'll answer those questions in terms of why now. I appreciate, obviously, the mayor was arrested back in December 20, but obviously very shortly after that, the government announced its inspection, and we obviously decided to wait until the results of that inspection were known. We then took time to consider that report and then ultimately decided, having spoken to the likes of Merseyside Police, sought our own legal advice and consulted internally, to then send the additional inquiries, which we did in September, and we didn't receive the response to those inquiries until the beginning of December last year. So in terms of why now, that is the timeline on this, and we have obviously been flagging at previous audit committees the ongoing work that we've been doing around the bribery and corruption issues. So hopefully that answers those questions. In terms of the prior year, obviously the mayor's arrest was a game changer in terms of requirements. Obviously, there's a general level of work that we need to do around management override control in the past, which we have done, and we're confident in that work. But the arrest of the mayor significantly changes the level of risk and therefore the level of work that we need to do, and that's why we're obviously increasing the level of challenge and work that we're doing in those areas in relation to both 1920 and 2021. And in terms of materiality, I think that is something that we do need to discuss further with both management and commissioners, and we do need to be comfortable with it. Overall, audit materiality is around 17 million, but we would expect a threshold that is below that because we need to audit to a lower level than that. So I can't give you a precise figure at the moment because I think that is something that we need to look at and consider further with both management and commissioners. But it will be below that figure of 70 million.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit perplexing. Councillor Crofts has asked, why now? And you've kind of answered that, the mayor's arrest was a game changer. I understand that. But correct me if I'm wrong, you have no evidence at all to support your rationale why you're doing this. You're trying to prove that something didn't happen. You don't have any tangible evidence at all that supports the need for this piece of work, because as a member of this committee, I'm looking for assurances in certain areas. And, Councillor Crone pointed out we've been buffeted financially, left, right, and centre. And I've got to say, I fully endorse the Chief Exec's response to say, why? The cost involved here could be massive to a city that's already having to pay for the commissioners, having to deal with the level of cuts that we've got to do. And before, I wanted an assurance as a member of the committee from the Chief Exec that before any decision to go to this wider inquiry, he'd bring it back to this committee with a full cost base to do it, because this affects people's lives. And unless you've got something to tell me about, you have not one shred of evidence to say in what department and what area you've got concerns about. My degrees in finance and economics, you can look at where is it? What are you looking for? This blanket approach that you need to check anything that the Commissioner has already checked. What's the rationale for that?
In all due respect, it's because we're asking for this because we don't have the evidence. We need the evidence that this doesn't go any wider. It is the fact that we don't have the sufficient evidence. We are required by auditing standards to seek and secure sufficient audit evidence to sign off that on the risk of management override of control. The former mayor has been arrested on allegations of bribery and corruption, very specific and very serious allegations, and he was in a great position of power and could have provided pressure, influenced, and provided opportunity for other people in that position. It's really important that we get to the bottom of how far and wide that went, and we just simply have not been presented with evidence to say that nothing else occurred outside of the areas that have already been reviewed by the government's inspector. We need that audit evidence. We cannot sign off on the management override control risk without that evidence.
I have to say, before I take in any other comments in relation to this, I find that a bit of a weak answer, to be honest with you. And I think suggesting that you need evidence to kind of go forward and a lack of evidence to kind of go forward. But all it would have taken in the past is to read a copy of the Echo or listen to the news to warrant an investigation in the past. So again, comes back to the question of why now in relation to this, and why is it in the interest of the council, or is it in the interest of others to have this investigation now? I'll let you respond to that in a sec, but let me see if anybody else has any further points that they want to bring in. Councillor Croft.
Sorry, Chair, thank you for your indulgence. Yeah, thank you for that answer to Councillor Mitchell's question. It seems to me, though, that the answer that you gave to Councillor Mitchell is different, really, from the answer that you gave to me in respect of the prior year considerations. The risk of the mayor that was arrested using his position of power and influence to suborn council officers, senior or otherwise, to engage in bribery and corruption in the years for which you've signed off the accounts already. There is an absence of evidence in exactly the same way in those prior years. You seem to be remarkably unsuspicious about that activity in prior year, but very suspicious about the periods for which you've not yet signed off. And I wonder what the explanation is for that difference.
Well, it's the very simple answer of changing from a very general concern around management override of control to a very specific and serious one with the arrest of the former mayor in December 2020.
Ramon.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just a fairly light one, to be honest. It was more across the point that you mentioned very early on in response to my question that the scope is going to be quite important for this. So once the scope is agreed, and I'm guessing there'll be a letter of some sort from yourselves to the City Council that kind of confirms what that scope is for them to go and activate a consultant if they choose to do that. Will that be, if those points that are outlined in what you would like to see in that scope of that report, if all those items are addressed, is that the end of it, or would that be then the beginning of yet another process that the council will have to go forward with Because if this full investigation is then concluded and there is no further evidence of any more fraud in any other areas, will that be then the end and then the books can be signed off? Or would you still feel that there's a potential scenario where that independent review will not be enough and we have to go through another cycle of trying to provide some more evidence?
If we are satisfied with the scope and that review comes back and identifies that there aren't any other issues that we need to look at, then that should provide us with enough audit evidence to move forward towards sign off of the accounts. Obviously, if the review did identify further issues, then further work may well be needed by us before we can go to sign off.
Before I bring in Stephen Gregory for the last word on this, because I'm keen to draw it to a close. Daniel Fenwick, your hand has been up since the last item, and I don't know whether you wanted to come in on any specific on this.
My apologies, that's a legacy hand. I should have taken it down earlier.
That's fine, I just want to check. Stephen.
As Ramon says, the scope of this review, should council decide to go ahead with it, is critical. Going back to, I think, Councillor Croft's comments, I mean, what we're dealing with is something that is inherently low risk, because as he has pointed out, as I think a couple of the councillors have pointed out, there have been no indications of further widespread problems as were found in those areas that were subject to the earlier review. So there is nothing that would be indicative of a wider problem. Therefore, the inherent risk of finding that problem is lower. And with the levels of audit materiality that you're talking about, I assume that I just wondered if you could give council an indication as to, you know, as I'm sure you've done these sorts of investigations before, what sort of effort do you envisage would be required? Because the way I'm taking it away as a former auditor, external auditor, it doesn't sound like a particularly onerous, you know, I would scope it very specifically. I would be looking for things which were very clear indicators of problems and drilling in on those. Which I don't know whether that's the approach that Grant Thornton would be prepared to take on this, but that might be something that would result in a shorter, more immediate review that should give you the satisfaction you're looking for, given that there are, as Councillor has pointed out, no indications of problems in other areas.
As I said before, we will need to discuss further the scope with management and commissioners, but the things that we think that the inquiry will need to include is a review of communication data for all heads of department and above. That is potentially quite a comprehensive piece of work. We do think, because of the concerns around particularly delegated authority decisions, given that the Mayor could apply pressure and influence people making who've got the authority to make those decisions, and the fact that we'd need to review all of them above a level of maturity that we're going to define, I don't think we're going to be able to reduce the scope of that significantly. Where there is potentially scope to be a bit more risk-based and do it more sample-based is around some of the kind of major procurement decisions that have been made in those department areas. We would particularly look at areas where there have been, for example, a lot of contract extensions or variations, or where, for example, direct awards were made without a procurement process. So we would do that more on a risk-based, exception basis. So there is scope for us to do it in the way that you've described in some aspects of the scope. But I think in some areas it would be a fairly comprehensive piece of work around reviewing communications data and looking at delegated authority decisions.
Which could prove to be quite problematical, because we're not sure how reliable some of that data might be and how easily accessible it might be.
And that's something that we'd need to understand from the beginning with management. I think it's important to say that if there was issues around access to any information, that could be because it's the record keeping is poor, or because maybe even, for example, Merseyside Police say that we can't access it because it's subject to the criminal investigation. If there is going to be limitations on evidence or information available to that inquiry, then it may be that the inquiry shouldn't go ahead because it won't give us the evidence that we need. So that is something that we do. Again, we need to look at the very beginning before any major work is performed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'll take Councillor Lavelle and then I'm keen to move on.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for indulging me. I appreciate I'm not in your direct line of sight, so I do appreciate you bringing in this sort of late hour on this item. I just wanted to ask a quick question: why an independent inquiry is being considered, but not an internal inquiry?
I think it just adds strength to the review if the review is undertaken by someone that's independent to the council. I think it just adds more credibility. The other issue is actually around expertise. We would expect that the inquiry is carried out by someone with expertise in terms of forensic investigations, and with all due respect, we don't believe that those skills necessarily exist within the council. There is also obviously the other advantage of in terms of capacities. Having someone independent do it is around capacity, because obviously we are aware that management is very stretched. We are aware that this review would have an impact in terms of servicing it, but obviously in terms of conducting it may be more speedy for an independent firm or person to conduct this review.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for that. I assume that we will get a future update on this, possibly not for the 24th of February, but certainly for the 11th of March committee. Can I move that the update is noted? I agree. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 6 then, update on Commissioner's first progress report to the Secretary of State and Action Plan. That's in your supplement agendas, pages 162 to 187. As members are aware, the committee has oversight in terms of monitoring the progress with the improvement plan, and this item relates to the report that was published at the end of last year from the Commissioners to the Secretary of State. Can I ask that Tony Reeves, as Chief Executive, lead on the report and action plan?
Thank you, Chair. As members of this committee know, the part of the direction from the Secretary of State is that the Commissioners report back after 3 months and then 6 monthly thereafter for the rest of the intervention. Appended to the report is their first report that has been made public, within which they make 10 recommendations to the Council. I'll take you through each of those briefly in a moment. The responding to this is really significant. We take it very, very seriously. The strategic improvement plan, which is one of the recommendations, has now been approved by Council, building on the action plan that we've taken into this committee previously, which has now been reshaped around the 3 outcomes of the strategic improvement plan, will be the guiding document by which the Commissioners judge the Council's progress over the coming period. Responding to this and making sure that from culture change all the way through to all our systems and processes, all of the improvements are made and they stick within the organisation will require considerable resources, and the Council is making those resources available. We think the cost of this in total, including the cost of the intervention itself, will be around £6 million. So it's very, very significant investment in getting this right. As I said, the strategic improvement plan has been to full Council and was approved in December 2021. That was subsequently signed off by the Commissioners at their oversight board. So it's been fully approved as part of that process, because it needs to be with the satisfaction of the Commissioners. As you will know, The council has signed off a submission to the Local Government Boundary Commission, which deals with another one of the Secretary of State's requirements, and that went to full council on the 8th of December, and that submission is on a reduced number of wards and predominantly single member wards, and that has now gone off to the Boundary Commission. There's a big issue in terms of the council's leadership capacity to address all these issues, and we have strengthened considerably with the appointment of Jackie McKinley as our Chief Operating Officer, a new post, and she started beginning of last week. Dan Fennick, who's is online this evening as our new City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer. Anne-Marie Lubansky will be joining us at the end of the month as the new Director of Adult Social Care. Mark Bousfield, who's with us tonight, has been appointed as the Director of City Development. Claire McColgan has been appointed as the Interim Director of Neighbourhoods, pending the full recruitment to that post. And Melanie Crichton, our Director of Finance and Resources, has also been appointed by Appointments Panel as Deputy Chief Executive. So instead of a revolving Deputy Chief Executive, we now have a fixed position, and I'm pleased to say that is Mel. The 2 financial reviews have been completed by Cipra. One was focused on financial management, commissioned by the council, by Mel. The other was looking at financial resilience, commissioned by the commissioners themselves. And these will be reported back to this committee in full, and they will also be made public and will go to full council. The response to these will be part of the council's budget papers that go forward on the 2nd of March. I think that's right, Mel. So if I just can briefly take the 10 items and just in Appendix 1, we've set out the detailed response to this. There's a requirement for us to develop a council plan. As you know, we have a city plan that we've developed with our partners that sets out the strategic direction for the city in the coming years. Work on the council plan, which is the council's response to that, but also setting out political priorities and our improvement and transformation journey, including embedded within this will be the strategic improvement plan that I just referred to. Work started on this in November 2021. We are aiming to get this to Cabinet on the 18th of February and into the budget papers for full council on the 2nd of March. There's been extensive engagement with staff and departments, and of course with members. There's been a number of sessions with members to make sure there's proper political input into that process of the council plan. We'll be bringing that forward, and our anticipation is we can meet that requirement in full, and we're working closely with the commissioners to make sure that we're doing it with their satisfaction. Strategic improvement plan, which is number 2, has already been signed off, as I've said. What we're clear about is that they won't be 2 separate documents. We want to bring them together so we have one system for performance and programme management across the whole. And I think, not putting words into anybody's mouth, I think from your assurance point of view as an audit committee, I think that will be really helpful for you to see everything in one place with one system of controls sitting above that for you to judge from an assurance perspective whether we're getting this right. In terms of item 3, which is about robust prioritisation, we recognise how important this is given the scale of the challenges we're facing, being referred to earlier on, with reduced budgets, etc., and some additional challenges because of all of this, and other things we're facing, such as the recovery from COVID, etc. So we've been through a really robust process, a corporate management team. This again will form, the finalised prioritisation process will form part of the council plan, so we'll come back in here for you to look at as an audit committee and for council to take a view on. And that prioritisation is picking up the requirements of the intervention, the recommendations from the commissioners, the implementation of the strategic improvement plan, and of course the council's political priorities as set out by the Mayor and Cabinet, and the recommendations in the Cipra Financial Resilience Review as we take that forward. So again, that will be coming forward. We're very satisfied we can meet that requirement in full. In terms of the capacity and capability gaps in the Council, the procurement and legal services in terms of our corporate functions are the first two services to be reviewed, and those reviews are being scoped at the moment. Because our City Solicitor Monitoring Officer is a new appointment, we've agreed with the Commissioners that Dan will initially review legal services himself, and we'll work with corporate management team, Cabinet and the Commissioners in doing so, and we will decide whether there's any further work that's required with the Commissioners as part of that. And we're scoping some work to review the procurement service as we move forward, and we'll be looking at further corporate services, but on a phased basis rather than trying to do everything at once. And progress will be reported through the through our normal reports into this committee on the intervention. In terms of the financial improvement plan to address the weaknesses in the Cipra report, a high-level plan has been developed and was considered by the Commissioners of the Oversight and Assurance Board in December. And a detailed project plan is now being worked up, and a separate report will be presented to Cabinet and to Audit Committee in the Cabinet next month, and then at the subsequent meeting of the Audit Committee. So that will come back in front of you. In terms of the requirement to produce a medium-term financial strategy, an interim MTFS has been produced and agreed by Cabinet in November. We couldn't conclude that until after we had considered the government's settlement, which came through just before Christmas, and of course the Cipra report on financial resilience and financial management. The response to all of those things will now form, in terms of the medium-term financial strategy, will form part of the budget papers and the final set of proposals on that, which will come forward on the 2nd of March. And that will result, as we say here, in some transformation and budget-saving proposals, which will need to be developed into a 1-, 3- and 5-year plan across the Council to build the financial resilience that we're going to need to avoid the Council facing any significant financial shortfalls in the coming years. So to make sure we're on a really, really robust financial position. In terms of strategic risk at item 7, a revised risk management strategy and corporate risk register came to this committee in November. Those documents have been reviewed in light of the pandemic and the best value inspection. They then went on to Cabinet in December and were approved. And this is being underpinned by much more rigorous corporate management team oversight of risk management, with monthly reports going in. I think what we're saying here is a key part of our culture change, to embed risk management into everything we're doing as a council, and we're taking that incredibly seriously, and I've no doubt you will have a view on that as an audit committee as we move forward. In terms of the scope for the review and reform of the Constitution, this work was agreed by full council on the 8th of December, and there's a cross-party member working group chaired by Councillor Abdul Kadir, who's the lead cabinet member for governance, taking this forward. The Centre for Governance and Scrutiny are carrying out this work for the council, and it will be complete by May 2022. And just to note, our new Chief Operating Officer, Jackie McKinley, until Christmas when she departed, was the Chief Executive of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. So there's a really good link in there, and the work that the experience that Dan Fenwick brings as well, coupled with Jackie's experience and the capacity and capability inside the organisation, I think puts us in a really strong place to take forward the Constitution, but also the wider governance issues. In terms of the requirement of the commissioners for us to carry out a baseline survey as part of the Culture Change Programme, that's something we were already on with. A supplier has been appointed to carry out that work, and a lot of progress has already been made in terms of that long period of culture change, and a baseline survey will be undertaken, so we'll meet that requirement in full, and there'll be regular surveys on an ongoing basis to check that we're making and embedding the required cultural changes to the organisation. And then in terms of item 10, which is about continuing to strengthen the council leadership and capacity and capability, there's a particular focus on the quality of report writing. There's in-depth work going on there, including training and new templates, and strengthening pathways for decision making. Dan, already in the first month or so that he's been here, has identified opportunities to really strengthen that approach and controls in that. I think the work that we're doing already goes beyond what the commissioners are going to require us to do to make sure that, as we said before, our governance and controls are second to none as we move that forward. The final point I want to make on this, and this was something that was flagged up in the Calla report as well, around the requirement for a records management strategy. Some of our record keeping in the past in certain areas was not good enough. We're working very hard to strengthen that, and there's a task and finish group has been set up to get that right, and we will be reporting regularly into you as part of the future reports that you get, and that's a key part of the strategic improvement plan as well. Thanks, Chair. I took a bit of time on that, but it's really, really important you get the message how seriously we're taking this. And this isn't a vote on, this is core council business in terms of addressing this and putting right the things that you as a committee, the council as a whole, and of course the public of Liverpool can make sure that they have confidence in the systems and processes, the culture and the integrity of the whole organisation as we move forward. Very happy to answer any questions. The recommendation is that you note the progress and of course receive future reports.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for that robust report. I'll take comments, questions from members. I see Stephen Gregory's hand up first, unless that was a legacy hand. Stephen?
Sorry, Chairman, legacy hand. I'll put it down.
Okay, no worries. Councillor Lavelle?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, first off, if we are to receive future reports, I'd like to suggest that we may have a commissioner come to present it in future, if I can. And just on the report, I think there is shoots of green within it, and it's a positive thing to see. And that's I think one of the things I could pick up on was around officer capacity and capabilities. I just wonder, what are we doing concrete to make sure that we actually are strengthening, in all levels of our services where the weaknesses have been identified, where we're making sure that we're getting to the root causes of the issues, because I don't think the solution is to add more work and pressure to our officers currently. There's a clear issue there which needs to be addressed. And the second question, if I may, is around the Echo article today that we're going to give our commissioners a 50% pay rise, which in some cases the daily rate is going to be more from the lead commissioner than some of our council taxpayers pay in a year. And I find it grossly unacceptable that we should be allowing this to happen when, in the context of in excess of £30 million worth of budget savings to make, and probably the expectation that we're going to put up council tax for our residents, that we're allowing commissioners to be paid this excessive amount. So can I ask why this has been allowed, how it's been allowed, and if we should suggest to the commissioners that they do not take the 50% pay rise and refuse the government's suggestion that they should be in receipt of it?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the first point Councillor Lavelle raised, this is about really clear prioritisation, the improvement journey being in bite-sized chunks rather than to do everything at once. There's a lot happening in the organisation. It's a busy city, as you'd expect, with a lot of requirements on the council. We have significantly less resource than we used to have, and the demands upon us haven't shrunk over that period. And of course, we have COVID, and responding to all of this on top of that. So we need to be really sensible in terms of our prioritisation. We are having to use some external capacity in terms of consultants to cover the work that we need, some of the work that we need to cover on improvement activity, in order to make sure that we meet the requirements. We're doing that judiciously, but there is a need for a lot of work to be done, and we'll continue that prioritisation process. And obviously the recruitment, the restructure, etc., as part of the council planning process, once the plan and the priorities are set, we can make sure in future budgets that we resource the priorities and get very focused on doing those things, and then come on to other things once those things have been dealt with. So I think an intelligent and sensible way, in terms of how we deploy our resources, rather than just expecting an organisation which has shrunk considerably just to take on a lot of extra work. And I think that was the spirit in which Councillor Lavelle asked that question. In terms of the report today in the Echo about the Commissioner's fees, all I can say on this is that the Commissioner's fees are set by government. We don't get a say in that, but we are required to make those payments. I'm not going to comment further at this stage. We are very clear that those are set by government, and we are just expected and required as part of the intervention to meet the rates that government have made. And I believe the reason why they've been reviewed is because of rates that have been agreed on interventions elsewhere in the country. But I can't say any more than that at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brunt.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions if I can. First of all, I appreciate the commissioners have got defined remits, but they do have an overarching capacity to raise stuff if they become concerned about stuff outside their remit. Have there been any concerns raised that would perhaps endorse the auditor's view that we ought to be deep diving elsewhere in terms of activities, or so far have their inquiries and activities been directed to the areas of their original interventions? And then secondly, which is a broader point, is whether or not the £6 million that's referred to in the report about covering the cost of the intervention, but that also, as I understand it, includes a lot of the remedial reactive measures that we'll be taking to boost the amount of provision that we've got in the areas where we need additional work done. What level of assurance do we have that that sum in question is going to be enough to, first of all, boost up those back office functions, the unloved ones, if you like, unloved by Eric Pickles and others, the sort of, dare I say it, the lawyers, we're not lawyers, don't we? But more importantly, even the accountants and the surveyors doing the valuations, and the auditors carrying out the assurances. What level of confidence can we have that that £6 million will, first of all, bring those, and the document keeping, actually, which is a Keller report rightly showed was totally inadequate in parts of the council. What level of assurance do we have that that will be enough? And then secondly, will that allow us to not just get to the level we want to be, but to do the catch-up work that the Chief Executive was just mentioning? And I'm conscious that we've got a huge job of work to do in the estate management, the valuations, resetting rents, and if we are embarking on the policy of even giving not-for-profit organisations leases, etc., at commercial rents, that's a huge amount of extra work as well. So not only do we have to raise standards to get to an acceptable level in those, we've got to do a load of catch-up work as well. How do we know that the £6 million is enough for that?
I'm trying to. We have looked really hard at this. This is. And you have an experienced management team, and I think we have, we haven't looked at these issues through rose-tinted spectacles. We've tried to be pragmatic. We've also tried to be cognizant of the financial position the council is in, and completely understand that the securing the right outcomes for the people of Liverpool is a top priority, and we see this improvement journey as better enabling us to do that in the future. It's a necessary response, not just to the best value inspection, but the issues and weaknesses that we've identified in the organisation that need to be addressed over the period we've been working. I think all we can say at this stage is this is our best estimate of the resources that will be required. We don't foresee any significant shocks. We think we now collectively have a good handle on the organisation's strengths. We think we can make real progress against this improvement plan. There's no rocket science here. It's about systematically putting things right. The culture change is the biggest challenge. The staff are responding very positively to that. Early indications are that we are making progress, but there's a lot more to make and to get things embedded. It isn't just what we have definitely identified is some of the cultural challenges are not just in the former Regeneration department and in property services, but in wider parts of the council as well. And we're addressing those issues. So I think we are reasonably confident that we can do this with that resource, but it's something that an intelligent organisation will keep under review and will forwards, and perhaps we would anticipate at this point in our improvement journey as well. And hopefully, if there are any things that we need to pick up in addition to the things that we're forecasting at the moment, that efficiency and the speed with which we're able to do things as we build the capacity of the organisation will give us some headroom to do that without having to come back and say we're going to need some more resource. But I think as a management team, we're confident that we've got realistic forecasts, but there is no guarantee here at the moment. What I can say, the other point that Councillor Brandt raised, we have seen nothing as a management team through all the work that we've done to indicate that there are problems of bribery and corruption elsewhere in the organisation.
Mel, do you want to come in on this one?
Thank you. Just to add to what Tony said, the proposals that are being consulted on at the moment and the budget that's being consulted on adds permanent resource in some of the areas, for example, planning. So there is not only the 6 million, there is permanent resource on top of that. The other thing that Tony and the Improvement Board have asked us to look at is surge resourcing for exactly what you've just talked about. So getting that capacity in to get on top of anything that is a backlog for us, or if we need to take our own staff out of day-to-day business as usual work to work on improvement, we can then backfill that. So we're currently looking at that proposal, and we'll bring something forward. There will likely be additional resource built into the medium-term financial strategy, which we've talked to Cipra about methods of funding, and we may be able to utilise capital receipts flexibilities for that. So there's likely to be more in there, but that's going to be around surge capacity for us.
Councillor Conception.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to obviously endorse Councillor Bell's comments in relation to the ECHO article today, and I understand that the proposed increase is going to be backdated to when they started. So in terms of best value, I think we should be asking them if they provide the best value for this city, the commissioners. But my question really is in relation to property transactions. Can the Chief Executive explain or tell me how many property transactions are currently waiting consent from the commissioners? And if you know the amount, can you tell us if there are costs to the council in that? Because obviously we're facing many, if you like, challenges in terms of providing services to the city. So could you just maybe indicate if there's a cost and how many property transactions are being held up by the commissioners?
I don't believe, and if this is any different, we'll come back and confirm it later. I don't believe anything is currently being held up with the commissioners in terms of property transactions. We've got a regular process of working closely with the commissioners, building in their time as part of the decision-making process on any transactions that they have to be involved in. Obviously, that's bedding in, but that is starting to flow, and I don't believe there are any things being currently held up as a result of that.
Okay, Councillor Crone.
Just following up on Councillor Conception's point, one of the things that was raised in the Commissioner's report was that there were still property transactions in the pipeline which had unsound valuations attached to them and they weren't using the proper methodology. Is that being addressed, and are the ones in the pipeline now using the Red Book or another good approach?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ramon. Yeah, okay. In relation to this.
Yeah, in relation to the Chief Executive question, it's not in any way a trick question. You're
No,
absolutely
in
not
relation to the other point, because I've had Ramon waiting for a while. So if I can take Ramon first, perhaps, and then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'll only be quick. Thank you, Chair. I think it was a good overall presentation at the beginning, and I think a lot of the questions that I had have been answered throughout this dialogue. But I think the only one I've got left is on that risk management. I understand that the council's got a big priority on risk management at the minute, and it just seems that just thinking from what you've mentioned just then in your overview, I was just thinking about, with all these risks being quantified, so if all these risks got a price against them, and if so, is that something that's within that 6 million that's been highlighted, or that overall budget that's been highlighted there? And also with regards to risks, is it something that over time we're planning on reducing the risks over time, or is it simply an identification process, and how are we actually planning on mitigating a lot of those items that are managed?
So, great questions, Chair. We could probably have a meeting on risk management just on this issue on its own right. I think how the council addresses strategic and corporate risks is work in progress. I think we are taking this really seriously. Part of this is about culture and embedding risk management at the core of everything we do properly. From the inception of ideas and option appraisals, thinking about risk, we're having to retrofit some risk management practices to things that have been in place for a long time. So that's why it does take time, and it's not a criticism of the organisation at all, but we're taking this incredibly seriously. I think, as I said earlier, I think it's an eyes-open approach to what we're facing. There are significant headwinds facing local government and other public services. For example, the COVID pandemic, we don't know where we are on the cycle of the pandemic at this stage. There's some positive signs, but there's also negative signs. Just before Christmas, the director of the Wellcome Trust said he believed we were closer to the beginning of the crisis than the end of it. So there are a lot of unknowns out there. In terms of the stuff that we do know, I think we do have an eyes-open approach. We're looking to quantify risk as far as possible, and we're absolutely looking to manage that risk, eliminate risk as far as we can do, mitigate risk, so that we would like to see a lot of these risks coming off the risk register or being downgraded in terms of the way that we rate those risks and therefore prioritise our responses to them. So a very proactive approach to risk management. But as I said, it is work in progress, and we're in no way complacent about the journey that we have on risk management. I'm not sure whether Mel wants to come in as well alongside.
We do carry earmark reserves and a general fund balance which are based on risk, and this year we will closely align them with the risk register and with the strategic improvement plan risk as well, which will then quantify the amounts that we've got in the balances. We have got some of the risks already in there and have carried them for a number of years, and then we assess that annually as part of the budget setting process.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
And thanks, Chief Executive, for the report at the beginning. It was very full and very good, so very informative. Two questions that are spun on from some of the answers. One of them was regarding the point made by Councillor Lavelle and the Commissioner's costs. I absolutely accept, and we've discussed this, that this is set and it's not something. Is there a way that we can ask the Minister involved? Can we specifically get any support? Is there a way that this committee can write to the Minister? I don't know, it's a question for you, Chair. Can we write to the Minister and say this is putting intolerable pressure on the city which is already dealing with intolerable pressure. So in the spirit of positivity, not negative, is there any help and support, and is that something that we can do? And my second question comes off from Councillor Conception's question around any backlog that sits kind of within Regeneration and other directors here. Absolutely accept your answer. We will be aware, I know Councillor Conception's aware of a matter which we are told is held up in his ward. There's stuff that are being held up in my ward and the board of North Green. There's other stuff. And we are told by the developers and the people, oh, it's being held up by Regen. It's Max Collar. Everything's held up. If you're categorically saying, as far as you're aware, there's nothing being held up. This is not. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to. Who do we kind of chase is the wrong word. Who do we contact to try and address some of these issues that we're aware of, that we're being made aware of, that are holding up regeneration plans in our wards?
Just before I bring you in, Tony, I think on the first point, I don't think there's any harm in me as chair writing to the Secretary of State if the committee is agreeable just on this issue to voice our concerns in relation to the pay increase, particularly as the workload is increased on the local authority, but the government still think it's fine to increase the fees of the commissioner. So if the committee is agreeable, I will do that post this meeting. Is that okay?
Agreed.
Yeah, great.
Chair, if I may, please.
On
my name, Chair.
No problem at all. On the point on property transactions, I don't believe any are held up. The commissioners, as I said to Councillor Conception, will double check that, and if that is the case, I'm very happy to receive any information you may have as well. We will make sure the committee won't wait until the next meeting. We will communicate that to everybody. In terms of regeneration programs, etc., we held a development forum in the autumn with, I think, about 200 people from the development industry were there, and Mayor Joanne, Mark Bousfield, and somebody else was speaking there. I was part of the Q&A, but not as a speaker. But we made it very clear at that meeting that there were some new processes we needed to put in place in terms of due diligence and robustness, and that would, in the short term, lead to some longer periods to get things done. But we were working very hard on our systems and processes to make sure that wasn't clunky and things started to flow as quickly as possible, but that the city was very much open for business, good business. And I believe we've been true to that with the work that we've been doing. But there are, because we're doing a lot more due diligence than we used to do, because there are more parts to our decision-making process than there were previously, it is taking a bit longer. What we're trying to do is to not push decisions back, but bring our processes forward, because it's just really important that we make these things happen. That's taking a bit of time to do. And I know Mark is here with us this evening. He may want to comment on that as well, Chair, but that's not in any way wanting to think. That's slightly different to the direct question Councillor Conception asked about, are there any property transactions that are with the commissioners at the moment? And I don't think there are.
Mark, do you want to say something?
I'll only risk repeating what Tony said, so I'll do it quickly. The commissioners themselves are not holding up transactions, but there are instances in which the commissioners disagree with how transactions have been put together, and necessarily at that point there's a longer process. Now, most of the instances that I can think of refer to prior, usually informal agreements to offer the land below its value, and of course they can't accept that any further. And that's
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from members at all? Okay, I will obviously get future reports and progress reports from the commissioners going forward. I think I'd like to take Councillor Ville's suggestion more seriously, and I think I'd like to have one of the commissioners, Michael or all of them, to come to the committee in the future to discuss this report. So perhaps we could make that recommendation going forward. That's agreeable. Is the report noted? Okay, thank you. Okay, I've lost my agenda sheet. Okay, item 7 is the Treasury Management Interim Report. For this item, I'm suggesting with members' agreement that we move it to the next meeting of the Audit Committee, which, as I've said, will likely be on the 24th of February. And that's also considering the budget matters at that committee. The reason behind this is that we want to make sure, as members, you are have the opportunity to take part in the Treasury Management training organised by Ireland Close. And one of the key recommendations, I think, coming out of the Keller report and Commissioner intervention is ensuring that members are briefed in the best possible way they can be. Obviously, in the past, we've taken reports like this without training, although that will be fine, I think the complexities of such report led to poor scrutiny, and some members might feel that they would want further information going forward. Therefore, in moving this item to the next audit committee, we're requiring members and alternates to attend the training organised by Ireland Close on the 18th of January. If you can't make that for any particular reason, do let Democratic Services know, and we will make sure that you can have an additional training for that. Is that agreed that we move this to the next meeting? Okay, brilliant. Okay, item 8, quarterly governance performance framework finance. As in previous meetings, we've had different departments come to us with our communities and regeneration come to us previously, so now it's time for finance. Of course, the additional documents were sent to you that you could request. Looks at the risk registers, so you have to email in advance to view those. Can I ask that Mel Crichton present the, or I was going to say a different officer, sorry.
Well, I actually think it should be Mel Dexter. So I think there has been a bit of confusion, but it isn't.
Oh, right, okay.
My directorate, so I am happy to answer any questions that people have got on it.
Okay, Mel Dexter, do you want to call? Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, thanks, Mel.
So this is the quarterly report from the Finance Committee. As you've already said, Chair, the previous committee meetings referenced both the Communities quarterly return and the Regeneration quarterly return. Hopefully members have had the opportunity to look through the raft of information that was attached to the supplementary that was provided earlier on. And there are no specific issues arising from the quarterly return, but we have highlighted in the report, the cover report, additional work that we will do to support the finance team in relation primarily to further work in relation to information governance. I'd just also like to report that the HR and payroll teams and learning development teams provided supplementary information in relation to performance statistics in relation to the Finance Directorate's information, and all have reported enhanced returns figures in terms of the training that's been performed in the area of the mandatory training that's required. So yeah, any questions need to be directed to various officers depending on what questions are. But yes, it's all positive in relation to the finance return report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do members have comments, questions that they want to ask as part of this? No? Okay. Thank you, Mel, for that. Sorry for the confusion. This is what happens when I write my own notes in advance of the meeting. I will ask Chris possibly to do it in the future. Okay. If that's okay, we'll can the update be noted? And we'll move on. Thank you. Okay. Item 9 then is the motion from full council investment in properties in Liverpool and the UK by Councillor Richard Kemp. Councillor Kemp is unable to attend this committee to present his motion. Therefore, I will move the motion standing in his name. I've been advised by Democratic Services for the purposes of the minutes, although I presented you a letter that he wanted to send round to members in advance of this meeting, that if I read the contents of the letter, then it will be absorbed into the minutes. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Dear colleagues, firstly, my apologies for being unable to attend the meeting of the Audit Committee. I'm having my first holiday for 2 years, for those who know Eric and I. Will understand why I wouldn't dare broach the idea of coming back from the Peak District for an evening. This motion is very simple and seeks to extend the existing position of the Council regarding the financial instruments that have been used in Liverpool and elsewhere to enable development. 3 years ago, the Fractional Investment Task Group, led by Councillor Jane Corbett, made as one of its recommendations a request to government that fractional investment methodologies should be subject to scrutiny by an appropriate body such as the Financial Conduct Authority. This was because people had been giving up their savings and often their pension savings by investing into a market area which they thought was safe and assumed was controlled. In fact, neither premise was correct. The task group only made a recommendation about fractional investment because that was the subject of the group's review. However, even whilst we were considering the report, it was becoming clear that the market had moved on. Fractional investment had largely finished, but some developers had moved on to a variety of other ways to get hold of people's cash. These include things like development bonds, property bonds, shared ownership of development, long-term fixed price loans. None of these are necessarily bad investment method. The problem has been in the way in which the investment method was employed by some developers. That is why I don't seek to ban these investment routes, but seek to make sure that the developers who use them do so within a regulatory framework, which means that people can invest with confidence. In fact, I think that proper regulation would increase the number of investors not only into Liverpool, but into other parts of the property market, because it would enhance the confidence in the property market, which is currently lacking. I hope that you agree with me insofar as the Council is concerned. This is a non-contentious matter. It is appropriate that the Council should seek to provide safeguards for investors not only in Liverpool but elsewhere. Yours sincerely, Richard Kemp. As I said, I'll be moving this in relation to Councillor Kent's name, and the basis that the proposals with the motion would need to be aligned and read in conjunction with the recommendations of the Fractional Investment Scrutiny Panel. By extension, I presume that we're asking Cabinet to endorse the terms of reference of the motion. Seek advice on how we move forward on this. Do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. That's correct. Just as to recollect and just expand slightly in terms of what the letter from Councillor Kemp raises. As members will no doubt be familiar with, the FISP, as I shall call it, put forward a very detailed report which has been acted upon by the Council and been previously put to Council and through the former Company's Governance Committee, which dealt with a number of those particular areas. In terms of the recommendations of the FISP, as the letter states, those are quite narrow in nature, reflecting the limited focus of defined scrutiny exercises. So Councillor Kemp's motion seeks to extend and add various other provisions to those recommendations, and members may see fit in due course to undertake further directed scrutiny exercises to come up with similar recommendations, as indeed is always available to members. But again, for the benefit of this committee, you're merely seeking to add to that range and ask Cabinet to examine the latitude available to further enhance and tighten up processes. And indeed, that may include further correspondence with governments and relevant representative bodies and regulators accordingly.
Okay, does anyone have any comments, questions? I may not be able to directly answer them, but Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. And I, for one, don't in any way begrudge Councillor Kemp standing in a grass skirt in Tahiti at the moment and deciding not to come in on Teams. Good luck to him. Just two quick points. First is that my recollection is that from the Fractional Investment Committee, part of its recommendations was we did ask the Secretary of State, we wrote to him, if I recall correctly, to better regulate that area of activity. Just in terms of Councillor Kemp's motion, actually my understanding is that where such investment is predicated on a loan being taken out from a financial institution in one mechanism or another in the UK, it is already regulated by that lending for residential purposes is already regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. But I think, without getting too picky, I think if the cladding scandal hasn't shown us that the property market needs much more effective regulation in this country, nothing will. So without getting tangled up in the niceties of it, I don't have an issue with what's proposed generally, and if anything, I'd like it to be a little bit wider.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cross.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So mine is a question for Mike, I think, and it's a question of clarification about the import of the motion. In the way that Councillor Brandt does not begrudge Councillor Kemp his grass skirt in Tahiti, I do not begrudge Councillor Kemp the import of his motion, because the way I read the motion, we're just asking the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Business Secretary to look again at this issue to see if additional regulation is appropriate. I don't understand the point that you make, Mike, about there being an implication from us approving this motion to call upon the Cabinet to do anything to change the terms of reference of anything. What am I missing?
Thanks, Councillor Crofts. The point here is that this is a motion from this committee calling on the Cabinet to consider taking an action. The action of Cabinet being to write to the relevant Secretary of State. The nuance here is that the motion as originally put, as you can see, it refers to Council noting, as this was originally referred from full Council on the 8th of December. Now, once this is then referred to Cabinet will then consider, obviously, that letter to the Secretary of State, but naturally Cabinet may, noting the concerns raised by this committee, consider other actions may be appropriate, which could include tasking work to our various select committees to explore the issues further. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? No. Oh, Councillor Mitchell.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand the process, because what Councillor Cross is right, what's in front of us isn't very clear. So what you're saying, because this has come from full council to here, it changes the kind of nuances behind it. But potentially, if we support the principle of this, it then goes back to the Cabinet to look at what, in the broader brush, we could potentially do to look at it.
Simply put, this committee calls on the Mayor and Cabinet to write to the Secretary of State, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, et al.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. I guess we then need to go to the vote on that particular recommendation. I guess then all those in favour of that? Unanimous? Okay. All right, moving on. Item number 10, exclusion of press and public. The items in relation to item 11, we need to decide as a committee whether we make the decision to exclude press and public from that particular item as the relevant legislation set out in the agenda notes. Are members in favour of doing so?
If I could assist the Chair at this point. Yeah. The fundamental issue with the exercise of exclusion of press and public is if members wish to have any specific questions on the exempt appendices which have been circulated to you. If members don't have any questions on that very specific content, then the committee may be happy to note and confirm the exemption, but otherwise consider the public aspects of the report on a continuation of the live stream as we are now. So that's at your discretion.
Anyone? Councillor Crone.
I do have a specific question that relates to one of the appendices, but
in which case our members are agreeable to exclude press and public and end the live stream at this point. If members could confirm that. Is that agreed? Thank you. For the benefit of my colleague and the public watching proceedings, this concludes the live stream of this evening.